Hi, I'm Mark Bernard, and I'm the CEO of Secure Knowledge Management Incorporated. I put together the following video for you to help you adopt ISO 27001, pick up some skills while you're doing it, and consider the strategy before moving forward with it. Hopefully you'll find this useful, and please feel free to like this video and share it with your friends. Thank you.
Welcome to our ISO 27000 adoption strategy and free training. During this video, I'm going to share some valuable experience and information. We're going to begin with an introduction. We're going to talk about the value of ISO 27001 adoption. We're going to talk about our implementation strategy and process. We're going to talk about change management, about skills development, scoping the work, the workflow of the program, the 12 essential processes that make up the program, a framework for mandatory versus discretionary controls. We're going to talk about the gap assessment, the capability and maturity model, our risk universe, the risk registry, mapping controls to asset risks. We're also going to talk about the risk assessment process and how to fill out the worksheet. We're going to talk about how to calculate a risk rating, risk management policy and appetite, the risk treatment plan, continual improvement roadmap. We're also going to talk about analyzing threats, how to analyze vulnerabilities, the business impact and exposure, assessing control effectiveness, the integration of risk management within a methodology, the ISO 27001 Normalized Relational Database used to record data, our next steps, the path to ISO 27001 registration certification, and finally, how can we help you to achieve your goal for ISO 27001? And now for the introduction. My name is Mark Bernard, and I'll be your instructor or your narrator for this video. I have over 29 years of experience in IMIT ICT. I worked for the first 7 years as a systems engineer, a network engineer, and a software engineer. My training comes from IBM, where I also worked for 2 years on the red team, attacking offshore financial assets. I taught in college as a professor of systems engineering. I also worked as a compliance and assessment manager for the local government. And I've also worked as privacy and security compliance officer in banking and in government. I have a lot of experience. I have many certifications, including the CISSP, the ISO 27000 lead auditor, SABSA F2 for secure service delivery. Also a number of ISO or ISACA certifications, the CISM for management, risk management, CRISC, the CGIT, and the CISA. I hope that you enjoy this video and get something from it, and contact me if you have any questions. During my career, I've worked in a number of industries, financial services primarily, also in government and manufacturing, technology. I've also had some really cool projects working in pharmaceutical where they are heavily regulated, transportation, academia. I've also worked with legal services on contract basis in the health authorities and in the federal cloud services and in banking as well. One of my most favorite projects was actually working in a nanotech lab where the particles that we were trying to protect were 1/millionth of a millimeter, smaller than the human eye could conceive. What is the value in adopting ISO 27001? Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's cover a little bit of the history of ISO 27001. First initiated around 1995 by the UK government because they were having some difficulty in managing third-party relationships and getting them to conform to the standards of the government. Later, it was adopted in 2005 by the ISO Standards Organization, and since then it's gone through a lot of growth. As you can see currently, it's up to 20% in 2015, and you can see the steady adoption along the path over the last 10 years. ISO, the International Standards Organization, has been creating standards for many decades now to help businesses around the globe to work with each other, no matter what country you're in or what laws you have to abide by. In this chart, you can see a number of ISO standards: 9001 for quality management systems, 14001 for environmental systems, 5001 for energy systems, 27001, which we're talking about today, for information security, 2200 for food safety, 16949 for automotive standards, 13485 for medical devices, 22301 for business continuity, and 20,000 rather standards for IT service. Many standards, and you can see the growth of the 27001 is at 20% currently. Now, lots of people ask me, what's the value in ISO anyway? Because every country has their own standards. For instance, the US relies on NIST a lot. Well, the value of standards is that thousands of professionals get together and they harmonize the standards and create a standard that everyone can use. And what this amounts to is a lot of knowledge that's been proven and practiced in each of the respective industries that can now be transferred to new people coming into the industry. This is extremely valuable because you don't have to start from ground zero anymore. The capability and maturity model provides a good example of how standardization around the globe can improve our business practices. And if we take a look at the maturity model, we'll see when a business goes from non-existent, level 1, to partially implemented, level 2, and then to level 3, implemented but not managed, or level 4, which is implemented and managed, and then to level 5, fully managed and automated. What happens is risk can be removed from the organization. Defects are reduced, incidents are reduced, and unplanned expenses that are associated with those defects and risks. This improves the organization. How? Process stabilization begins. When the processes begin to stabilize, the company spends less money on operations and fixing problems, and more money is invested. Most organizations start out at a low level, 1 or 2, and then industry standards kick in, which are usually higher at a level 3, which are implemented and managed, and then goals can be set to move forward and improve processes. Continual. Now we're going to talk about our implementation process, which we've been developing over the last decade. And now we're going to talk about our implementation process for ISO 27001. It begins with initiation. We follow the PMBOK model. The PMI has been developing with their professionals for over 30 years. It leads to planning. We plan our processes and get approval for them before we move on to execution. Because of our experience, we can help shortcut a lot of the processes and make it seamless. And then we control the process with our governance committee and our steering committee to make sure the ship arrives at its destination. And then finally, closure and handoff as knowledge is transferred over to the existing. We have extremely mature processes and widely accepted documentation such as statements of work, project charters, Gantt charts, and pencil charts used to keep track of the status of each project as we work with the steering committee and the managers on board to ensure that their ISO 27001 project ends successfully, on time, and under budget. And now we're going to take this one step farther and drill down a little bit deeper with the actual implementation strategy. Our ISO 27001 implementation strategy consists of 10 steps. And they are as follows. As we follow the project management methodology, we begin with establishing the scope, what's in and what's out, what information assets need to be protected. We need to identify them. And then creating the conformity matrix, which will later become the statement of applicability. Creating a list of assets so that we can do our risk assessment and identify which information assets are exposed. The legal registry is important to understand what the legal obligations are for the industry and the business. Creating the document and record registry to ensure that we have evidence of the process and the program. Conducting a risk assessment and beginning the risk treatment of risks. Creating a communication strategy to ensure that the staff and suppliers are all up to speed in supporting the process. Establishing the internal audit process so that we have an independent, objective person reviewing the program. Establishing performance metrics so that the governance committee can observe the process and make sure that the program stays on track. And then we end by transferring knowledge of the program over to management. Next, we're going to talk about change management and how it affects the organization and its culture. The Kebler-Ross curve provides a good example of the transformation that people go through in an organization when change occurs. First, there is an immediate denial. People don't like change generally, and they don't want to change. And then there may be some anger in some staff, but not all. A few will be angry about the change. And then some staff will begin to bargain their way back, seeing what can be traded off in order to slow down the process. And then finally, depression, but not serious depression, just depression in a way that people don't like change. Finally, acceptance will occur. And as people begin to accept things, they begin to engage and support the process. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, everyone will begin to move on and help. Next, we're going to talk about skills development. Skills development is in the news every day, and we have a shortage of skills. So let's get going. I'm going to use yet another best practice, Bloom's taxonomy, used in universities and colleges around the world. It consists of 6 levels. Knowledge. People need awareness of a subject, such as cybersecurity. And then they need to understand it, level 2. So we're going to help them understand it as part of this process. And then they'll learn skills where they can apply that knowledge so that they get to use it and maybe get a new job. Analysis. This is getting into a higher level where people can begin to solve problems. And then evaluation. This is where people can audit or redesign products. And synthesis. This is architecture. So this is at the highest level where you can design a cybersecurity program of your own. Next, we're going to talk about that first step in the process, scoping. So important. Scoping helps everyone to understand what's in and what's out, because as most projects get spun up, other managers will try and add stuff to the process to get their task delivered. So we need to understand what's out of scope and what's in scope, and we need to review it on a regular basis, especially when change happens. Next, we're going to talk about workflow. Yes, there's workflow within the program. A lot of people don't realize it. We're going to talk about this. This is what the workflow of the ISO 27001 looks like. A lot of people don't recognize it because sadly, a lot of people don't know what it is. It's listed in clauses 4 to 10, and we're going to talk about each one. There's a statement of applicability and the legal registry, which we mentioned previously. These are processes. Statutory and regulatory obligations are part of the legal registry, as well as contractual obligations. And then this process is mapped into the statement of applicability, or the conformity matrix, as it begins. The audit process kicks in, and we begin to audit the organization. Audit reports are delivered to the governance committee, also recorded as evidence of the organization's conformity. And when the external auditors come in, they will look at the internal auditors' reports to see how they're doing. And then a risk assessment will be done to determine what are the threats and vulnerabilities associated with it. This can be integrated into many different processes. You can do qualitative or quantitative risk assessments. There's no rules, but it needs to be done in order to determine where the gaps are. This will also include a privacy impact assessment if it's necessary. And anyone adopting GDPR will agree that PIAs need to be done. This information can be fed into the asset inventory, and assets can actually be recorded. These reports, the audit report and the risk assessment, are presented to the Management Review Committee, who consists of top-level managers who are responsible for portfolios, including resources and capital. And also added to the Governance Committee may be information provided by customers, customer feedback, or clients. And also business plans. So any changes to the strategic or tactical plans for the organization need to be considered. And then, of course, any sort of legislative changes. Because if you're a global organization, legislation can kill your business. Management will then accept risks or transfer them or mitigate them. And meeting minutes will be recorded, so the decisions are part of the evidence process. A risk treatment plan will be created for risks that need to be addressed immediately, and we'll talk about the risk appetite later. Corrective and preventative action plans are generated. Corrective generally for the immediate things, preventative for future things. A continuous improvement program and a plan will also be recorded. And then action plans will be worked out with each of the managers who are responsible for the assets so that we maintain the governance of the organization. This can also be integrated with other products and standards like ITIL and the forward schedule of changes, which can be used as a roadmap for continual improvement. Next, we're going to talk about a very popular subject every time I post it, the 12 essential processes. This is a reference model. It's used in architecture to help explain how programs fit together, and each process depends on each other. First, we're going to talk about governance. Governance is an important part that provides overarching direction to the program. And then risk management is the decision-making tool that every program needs to utilize. Vulnerability management is a key part to the ongoing day-to-day maintenance, reducing the risk to the organization. Compliance management is always at top of mind with managers to ensure that we're following the laws of the land. Communication is 30% of the solution, making sure that people know what they need to do in order to help the process. Awareness training helps to give people the skills so that they can do what they need to do as part of the program. Identity and access management helps us to make sure that the right people have access to the information they need to do their jobs. Knowledge management helps us to identify the important assets to the organization. Document and record control helps us to collect evidence and make sure that we have everything we need. Monitoring is key part, ears and eyes on the ground to know when threats or breaches are happening. And then finally, audit helps to review, verify, and validate everything that's been going on within the program. Next, we're going to review an important topic, mandatory versus discretionary controls within the framework. There are 261 control points within the ISO 27000-2013 version. 148 are part of the mandatory requirements. There's no option to not do any of these controls. They're all part of the program framework that we reviewed earlier. The other 113 are integration points. Mandatories, again, must be complied with. All 148 need to be implemented. Discretionary, 113, can be risk justified in scope or out of scope, which is kind of cool. So you need to do your risk assessment. This table shows the clauses and the clause numbers along with the descriptions and the number of controls for each of the points, which kind of implies how much risk each of these processes are involved with. Next topic we're going to cover is gap assessment, so that you understand how it is that you can go about assessing your organization. This is the gap assessment table that I've developed over the last 20 years. It lists all the controls and allows you to respond with information and evidence to substantiate the fact that the control is in place or not. We use the same control clauses so that's transparent with the framework. We use the same titles for each of the sections and descriptions that go along with those sections. And then we identify who the manager is that's responsible for ensuring that these controls are effective and operating as desired. And then we look at whether or not it's mature enough for the process. We identify the location of the evidence so that the auditor can review this, and any procedures or tools that are involved with the execution of the process. And then we make an outcome, whether it's conformant or not conformant, and we may add notes. Next topic we're going to discuss is capability and maturity model. That was part of the gap assessment we just reviewed. The capability and maturity model consists of 5-scale system, which reads as follows. Non-existent. The control has not been implemented. Partially implemented, which is where the control may have been put in place but may not be fully engaged. Implemented and not managed means the control is in place but nobody ever reviews it. Implemented and managed means that the manager sits down on a regular basis, maybe a quarterly or annual basis, and reviews the control effectiveness. Fully matured is the highest level of the maturity model. Next, we're going to talk about another one of my very popular slides out there called the risk universe. Helps explain a lot. I created this cybersecurity risk universe to help senior security and privacy professionals explain risks to senior managers and boards of directors. 5 risk groups based on CAS and COSO ERM are associated with products and services. Each of those risks include financial risks, have 6 assets associated with it, plus subsets, maybe contractors. Hazard risks also have 6 assets, plus maybe some outsourced services that they depend on, or supply chain. The same with strategic risks and compliance risks. 6 assets all contribute to the risk. Operational risk also is contributed to by those 6 assets. The next topic is the risk registry, and this is where we're going to map the risk universe into more practical terms. In this illustration, I've created a risk registry. It's a 1-page dashboard for executives to know how their risk is doing. Within the risk registry, I've broken out each of the 5 enterprise risk management type of risks into groups, identified what the risks are, for instance with strategic risk, competition, social trends, capital availability, with financial risks, pricing risk, asset risk, currency risk, or liquidity. Whether or not that risk is on track, the block will be green in front of the risk. If it's not, then below that in the white block we identify what the risk is and what the trigger points are. Hazard risks, liability towards, property damage, natural catastrophes are a concern. As well with compliance risks, we're worried about being compliant with laws or regulations. What are the trigger points? Operational risks, customer satisfaction, product failure, integrity, reputational risk, internal poaching, knowledge drain. What do we do about those risks? How do we deal with those? In this next section, mapping controls to asset risks, we're going to drill down to the operational level. In this section, we're going to talk about those 6 assets: people, information, hardware, software, telecommunications, and facilities. I've replaced the backbone with integrity as the goal for our risk management. What are the risks associated with people? What are the controls that we put in place? How are they functioning? This will allow us to evaluate and assess the controls at a more granular level. A lot of times, frameworks ask you to implement certain controls, but they never drill down to the level that I'm going down to here. Just simply, this helps us to look at people, property, information, systems, hardware, and telecommunications at a more granular level, allowing us to be more pinpoint precise about how controls are implemented and how risks are mitigated, so that if a problem arises, we know where to look and we know what to do about the risk. On this chart, I've flipped the verbiage for actual control clause references. So it looks a little bit scary and very technical, but it's exactly the same thing that we just looked at. The only difference is that the backbone is now pointing to product and service. These are the risks associated with the 6 assets: people, facilities, information, software, hardware, and telecommunications that could affect the delivery of our products or services for our organization. This will really impress the executives with the ability that you have to drill down and map risks and mitigate any sort of threats or vulnerabilities to the organization and its mission and strategic goals and objectives. In this next section, we're going to talk about the risk assessment process. In this illustration, I describe the risk assessment process as a waterfall with a number of integration points. During the risk assessment process, the first thing we want to do is identify the assets and also ask the question, is this a new asset? And if it is a new asset, then it should be added to the asset database. The next question, is this a major change? Has something seriously changed in the organization? And if it has, was the security architecture updated? Because that's important. Next question, are there any potential threats to this asset? And if there are, we should already know about them. We should have them listed in the threat analysis procedure. And are there any potential vulnerabilities which the threat may try and exploit against this asset? And we can also look at those vulnerabilities in another list of vulnerabilities that have been pre-screened. We look at the control selection because we always want to give credit to the existing controls that have been invested by the organization. And then we conduct the risk assessment and the report and deliver that to the governance committee so that they can make a decision on whether they want to accept or reject or transfer the risk. If they accept it, then a risk treatment plan is initiated. We work with the manager to reduce that risk and to apply some type of risk management activity. In this section, we're going to talk about filling in the risk assessment worksheet, which will help provide more details and maybe extend your knowledge. The risk assessment worksheet contains a lot of columns with information which we're going to walk through in the next few moments. First, we talk about the division and the owner of the asset, because every asset needs to have an owner. Then we are going to identify the threats, along with the threat description and the threat rating that has been previously calculated. The next step is to identify the impact to the organization on a 3-scale system. In this step, we look at the vulnerability associated with the asset that the threat might exploit. Finally, we need to evaluate existing controls to take into consideration the investment already made. The risk rating is then calculated and we determine what the next steps are. Normally, while I'm reviewing the risk table with the appropriate manager who's responsible for the risks, I like to gather some additional information such as what their actions are they would like to take and what the residual risk might be following the risk assessment, so that when we meet with the governance committee, we have this information on hand, and when they ask, we are prepared to respond to them with a plan on how to mitigate this risk. In the next section, we're going to talk about how to calculate the risk rating. This is a quantifiable risk assessment. The calculated risk rating ranges on a scale of 100%, and it's based on the threat times the business impact times the vulnerability minus the existing control implemented. And it could range anywhere from 0 to 100%. Some of these risks will be treated immediately. Anything from 89 below will be parked into a plan for the future, a continual improvement plan. However, extreme risks will be dealt with today. Next, we're going to talk about the risk management policy and the risk appetite. The risk management policy is often overlooked, but a crucial part of the overall cybersecurity program. Within the risk management policy, the risk appetite is described and defined. The risk management policy says that extreme risks scoring 90 on the risk rating scale or above are treated immediately. It also says that risk scoring below that will be put into continual improvement. Extreme risks go into the risk treatment plan for monitoring by the governance committee. Continual improvement plan contains risks that score 89 or below. They go into a roadmap and are added to projects as they come up, so no additional expense is required. Next, we're going to talk about the risk treatment plan. This is another type of dashboard for the governance committee as opposed to the board of directors. The risk treatment plan is another one-page dashboard for governance committee members to review and monitor. Within the risk treatment plan, we identify the information or the area that has a risk and what the vulnerability rating is. And then we also review management's decision on the governance committee to accept, reject, or transfer the risk. And then we look at the mitigation control and how much it's going to cost and what the residual risk will be once it's implemented. And then we look at the responsibility, the person or the manager who is responsible to make sure it happens. And finally, comments and status, and this is monitored by the governance committee for the cybersecurity program. Next, we're going to talk about the continual improvement plan or the roadmap. The continual improvement plan or roadmap is a strategic and tactical plan that lists a number of continual improvement activities scheduled for the next 3 years. And you can see that they're mapped here under technology, process, and people because they affect each different area in different ways. Next, we're going to talk about the approach to analyzing threats. On this illustration, I've already evaluated my top 8 threats. Here they are. In this illustration, you can see that my assessment of the threat depends on likelihood and exposure, further broken down by knowledge, skill, and resource, capability, and motive. The overall weighting of each category can vary depending on the organization and your approach. In each of the 5 categories, I've used a 4-scale system that is defined as follows. Under knowledge, I look at knowledge of the target's technology, technology training in the target's technology, subject matter expert of the target's technology, also subject matter expert in addition to inside knowledge. Under skill, I look at knowledge of the target's technology, technology training in the target's technology, subject matter in the target's technology, and subject matter expert in addition to inside knowledge. Under resources, I look at, is this a single person, a team of hackers between 1 and 10, a team of hackers between 100 and 1,000, or is it a team of hackers of 1,000 plus? Under capability, I look at, is this a single computer or server? Could it be a Bullwolf cluster of 1 to 100 CPUs? Is it a supercomputer, or could it be a quantum computer attacking us? Finally, I look at motive. Is the motive based on narcissism? Is it politically motivated? Is it espionage? Or could it be for financial gain? Generally, I do this assessment once a year, and my top 8 is as follows. Government spy and organized crime are at the top with 100. Competitors and contractors are 95. Terrorists are at 90. Malicious, 70. And third party, 60. And employee, 55. Those are your top threats. Next, we're going to analyze vulnerabilities and see what the top vulnerabilities are in the organization. My top 8 include software, telecom, hardware, configuration, nanotech, robots, food chain, and social engineering. When I assess vulnerabilities, I look at consequence and impact. I break those down into confidentiality, integrity, availability, severity, and exposure based on a 4-scale system. When I assess vulnerabilities, there are 5 categories to look at. Under confidentiality, I review 1 to 100 private records released to the public. 2, 1 to 1 million private records released to the public. 3, annual tactical marketing plans released to competitors. 4, strategic financial records released to the general public. Under integrity, I look at data or system integrity, fully redundant. Data or system integrity can be restored from mirrored images. 3, data or system integrity can be rebuilt. 4, data or system integrity cannot be recovered. Under availability, I look at data system, fully redundant. Data or system can be restored from backups. Data or system can be rebuilt. Data or system is not recoverable. Under severity, I look at 1, lost customers, 2, lost market share, 3, solvent, 4, insolvent. I also look under exposure for fully insured, partially insured 2, 3, liquidity of assets necessary for, and bankruptcy. As part of the risk assessment process, I review the vulnerabilities once a year. These are my top 8 vulnerabilities. Next, we're going to look at assessing business impacts and exposures. Under the following section, for business impacts or exposures, we look at a 3-scale system. Low equals a score of 1, medium a score of 2, high a score of 3. Across the top, we look at the impact to confidentiality, integrity, or availability. And within each of the top boxes, we'll look at the high ones only. Any employee or contractor who discloses sensitive information to unauthorized external sources is high under confidentiality. High under integrity. Any employee or contractor in a critical role who is charged or arrested for fraud. And under availability, the impact would be a pandemic, loss of employee for extended period of time, will slow down the business processes, and customer service could be negatively impacted. Business impact or exposure caused from information asset risks. Again, low, medium, high. Scale score of 1, 2, 3. Across the top, impact on confidentiality, integrity, or availability. So high under confidentiality for information would be sensitive information under the care of your organization ends up in the hands of an external party. Under integrity, mission critical information has been corrupted and inadvertently resulted in the incorrect reporting to management. Under availability, mission critical information has been lost and cannot be recovered. Business impact or exposure caused from risks to software. Again, the scale score is low equals 1, medium equals 2, high equals 3. Across the impact on for high, confidentiality, integrity, availability, the impact caused by confidentiality, the source code or of software developed by your organization has been disclosed to non-authorized external party. And under integrity, server-side encryption keys used to protect client information have expired and or corrupted, resulting in permanent damage to valuable information. Under availability, mission-critical software, including customizations and personalizations used to provide services to customers, has been lost. We are now looking at business impact or exposure caused by hardware risks. Okay, the scale again is low equals 1, medium equals 2, and high equals 3. Across the top, high impact caused to confidentiality is explained as hardware vulnerabilities are not assessed or managed. The impact or exposure to integrity for hardware involves incidents and problems frequently occur and go uncorrected for extended periods of time, impacting recovery time objectives. And for availability, hardware capacity planning has not been completed or validated. Now we're looking at business impact or exposure caused by telecommunication asset risks. Again, the scale is low, medium, high, 1, 2, 3. We're looking at high impact on confidentiality. Telecommunication lines are not protected from interception or eavesdropping. the impact on high for integrity. Telecommunication lines are not regularly tested against interception or degradation and quality loss. And the impact on availability or the exposure is telecommunication lines are not regularly tested against capacity and volume of traffic, contention, quality. Critical communication channels have no redundancy. And now we're looking at business impacts or exposures caused by risks associated with facilities. Again, the score is low, medium, high, 1, 2, 3. The impact on high confidentiality. No physical access control exists, allowing non-authorized persons to access your organization facilities, potentially leading to unauthorized disclosure. The high impact on integrity to facilities. Annual or periodic maintenance of physical facilities or environmental systems is not completed. The impact on high availability is no disaster recovery plan has been created for the local facility. If the facility is lost, your organization's services and customers will be negatively impacted. And finally, we're looking at business impact or exposure caused by risks associated with products or services. The scale is low, medium, high. The score is 1, 2, 3. And the high impact on confidentiality is your organization's data or sensitive customer data for one or more systems representing more than 10,000 users has been released. The high impact on integrity, your organization's data or data for one or more customers facing application lost integrity and require recovery from backups or evocation of business continuity plans. And finally, high impact associated with availability. Many customer facing your applications, organizational products and services, data sets become unavailable beyond service level agreement terms and requires evocation of business continuity plans. The next topic we're going to talk about is assessing control effectiveness. Assessing control effectiveness needs to happen on an annual basis as part of the regular security testing. The columns on my table map back to the control framework. So we have the ISO clause references for mandatory and discretionary, along with the descriptions. We also include a number of control points within each of the specific areas, and we also talk about the implemented controls in case there's some deviation, because there may be some exclusions within the control framework. And then we ask, has the evidence been validated, yes or no? And we ask about the skill level of the people operating or administering the controls to mitigate the risk. And then we look at whether the control has been tested. Perhaps there's annual penetration testing going on, for example. And then we give a score for the overall control effectiveness. In the next section, we're going to talk about something I created. It's called the Integrated Risk Management Methodology. The Integrated Enterprise Risk Management Framework consists of 3 frameworks. The COSO or CAS Enterprise Risk Management Framework is at the top of the framework. The ISO 3100 Risk Management Framework is in the middle, providing the procedural framework. The Boots on the Ground framework is based on the Harmonized Threat Risk Assessment Framework. And now we're going to talk about where we're going to keep all those records we've created within the ISO 27001 Normalized Relational Database. And here it is. I created this normalized relational database after about 2 decades of experience working with organizations and their ISO 27001 implementations. The statement of applicability is always the beginning within the framework. And within that framework are aligned to the specific accountability of controls. Also, statutory and regulatory as well as contractual obligations get mapped to the statement of applicability and the control framework so that we have some idea about how we are complying on a daily basis. And then the conformity matrix is used to establish the statement of applicability, also giving the internal audit people a source of information so that they can do their regular reviews. Assets need to be defined if we're going to identify the risks, so the asset inventory is a must. And the asset inventory can be assigned to specific managers, also integrated with other frameworks. Next comes the common threats and vulnerability safeguards. This is where the risk assessment takes place so that we can identify threats and then map vulnerabilities. This information will feed into the risk treatment plan. A report can be generated based on the risk treatment or any of the other databases that we have listed here. This is the dashboard for the governance committee. And then corrective and preventative actions spin out of the risk treatment plan. Those get recorded and also can be reported on, and so can continual improvement or the roadmap. Risks are treated, management reviews this on a continual basis. The next few images provide the actual field level information for each of the databases that we talked about, including the asset inventory, the risk assessment, corrective and preventative action, continuous improvement, and the risk treatment plan. In addition to statement of applicability and statutory and regulatory registry. Again, each of these databases you can print out a report anytime. Contractual registry can also be reported on, and so can the conformity matrix. Very useful tools. This is a great database to record records. And then the threat, vulnerability, safeguarding countermeasures as well. Next steps. Of course, after all this work, we definitely recommend that you approve the proposed strategy. And once you've done that, there's a budget associated with that. Please approve that budget. And once that's completed, assign the resources that are needed, including the contractor that's going to help you. And then begin to communicate the strategy to all managers to initiate and engage the buy-in process. Schedule a project kickoff and invite everybody, maybe even bake a cake and have them cut it. The path to ISO registration can be a smooth one if you choose the right contractor. The path is relatively simple and it contains 3 phases. The first phase is, of course, hire the ISO 27000 consultant that will provide you with the direction and guidance on the quickest path. And then successfully pass stage 1 audit. This is mostly for internal control measurement. And then successfully pass stage 2, which is when the registrar comes to visit you. How can we help you? Just ask and we will. One way that secure knowledge management can help is we provide services to small shops. That includes the ability to learn and certify so you can improve your skill sets or certify your organization. You can also do it yourself. You can buy all the materials that we talked about in this presentation from us. You can also seek our expertise and we can come in and act as your consultant or your outsourced auditor or security manager. Or you completely outsource the whole process. And we can also do security monitoring for you in addition to managing your ISO process. You can find more information at our website, securekm.com. I want to thank you personally for your time and patience in reviewing this material. And here's my contact information.